I have to say that as I listened to Minister Lenihan, I thought that the title of his paper ought to be More Fairy Tales from Merrion Street, because I will tell you this, that Minister Bryan is more Minister Onama than he is President Obama. And when he treated us to the quotes from President Obama, can I remind the Minister, if he bothered to read the quotes and their context, that those quotes happened after President Obama became President and in the context of various very large banking institutions like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac already having been taken into public ownership, and after AIG in effect having been taken into public ownership, and more so after almost a large swathe of Wall Street had been forced into mergers, had been acquired, and various large banks, regional banks in the United States had either in effect been taken into public ownership or had been put into forced mergers and forced acquisitions. So when you choose to quote, Minister, I wish that at least you might quote in the context if we are to actually have a useful debate in this House. Now, I want to call a spade, and I think, Minister, that you read out a page of shame on page 10 when you read out what the summary position of the 5 banks was. And let me take you through this again. You said Allied Irish Banks, 24 billion. Anglo-Irish, 28 billion. Bank of Ireland, 16 billion. EBS, 1 billion. And Irish Nationwide Building Society, 8 billion. Well, just let me say to you, Minister, and your cronies among the bankers and the developers and the cronies of Fianna Fáil in the toxic triangle. Can I just say this to you? Anglo-Irish Bank, 28 billion, and Irish Nationwide Building Society. That's fingers and that's Shawnee to some of us as we read about their capers in the paper. They account for 28 and 8 billion of that total 77 billion. That is half of what the Irish taxpayer is having to carry. And were any 2 bankers in the history of Irish banking and property development ever close to the government benches over there? If there were, I don't know who they are. And I can tell you that when myself and Deputy Gilmore, the leader of the Labour Party, visited Merrion Street on the fateful night of the guarantee, I asked your officials only 2 questions, as did Deputy Gilmore. We asked about those 2 banks and the effect that they were having on the destruction of Ireland's reputation, particularly in London and in New York. And all I can say is that you told us then what you are telling us today. Trust us, we're Fianna Fáil. Everything will be all right. That was what was supposed to happen in relation. That was what was supposed to happen in relation to the bank guarantee. The fundamentals, whether it was the governor of the central bank, whether it was the head of the regulatory body, Mr. Neary, whether it was a whole series of other officials, they told us over and over again the fundamentals of banking are sound. And when in the previous 2 years I questioned your then Minister for Finance, Minister Cowan, when I questioned him about his decision to allow the Quinn family and others to gamble on contracts for difference and actually reduce and avoid having even the modest stamp duty charged on that gambling that took place in Anglo-Irish Bank, I think you have a nerve to come in here and criticise other parties who have nothing like your track track record of collaboration and collusion with some of those who have brought the Irish banking system low, and in bringing the Irish banking system low have put a debt on the head of every man, woman and child in this country for this generation and for the next. And you have a nerve, Minister, you have a nerve to come into this chamber and to attempt to cost what you say are the purported proposals of the Labour Party when you don't actually bring in costings in relation to your own proposals. And let me just say, in relation to your own proposals, I expected that at the least you would walk into this chamber with that business plan that you would produce, because if I was a small or a medium-sized business person heading into my bank on any high street in any village or town in Ireland, I would have to take out some papers and say, this is what I expect in terms of cash flowing in and cash flowing out of my business, and this is how and why I want you to give me a loan. Where's the business plan? Where are the projected cash flows of NAMA over its 7 to 10 year life? If I was a householder who was thinking of buying a house, I would have to bring the bank manager details of my income and my family income, and the bank manager would take out a big long form and work out what I might or might not be entitled to. You come into this House and you give us a series of summary figures, which I'll return to later, which are grossly and grotesquely inadequate to the job of analysis and the respect that you should hold, if not the members of your own party, that you should actually have for the other members of this House who have a mandate from their electorates to protect their interest. And let me say this, Minister, in relation to the business plan and in relation to your analysis. In the analysis that you've set out here, we're being told there that you have valued, you're going to price the loans, the 77 billion, you're going to pay 54 for it. But you actually say in your statement, and I don't know what it means, but I do know from talking to some of the people who work with you, that you have evaluated some of the loans as good loans and some of the loans as distress loans. And in your speech you suggest that 40% of the loans, if I'm not mistaken, are income bearing. That's correct? Okay. Can I just ask you, can we have an analysis of what the broad make-up is of the good loans, the 40%, and can we have an analysis of what the broad make-up is, the 60% distress loans? Because unless we get a consolidated list in relation to each broad group of loans and each developer, there is no way that we can evaluate your proposal. And what you're actually asking us to do is to trust Fianna Fáil. I don't trust Fianna Fáil. Most of the people out on the street don't trust Fianna Fáil. And why? Why should you treat us like this when we're here for this really important day, a day with a price tag of 54 billion, and we're asked to trust Fianna Fáil? I mean, this is not an episode, you know, of Bart Simpson. This is actually meant to be the Dáil. You know, it's not trust me, I'm Irish, or it's not trust me, I'm a minister, or trust me, I'm a TD. This is actually a day for facts and figures that we can analyse, that we can sit down and we can make some sense out of the various proposals that you've brought today.
This is second stage, Deputy, and the information you've requested will be provided before the end of second stage.
Can I just ask you, in relation to the bankers, and by the way, I must admire your English. I noticed the word developers has disappeared from the lexicon. What was the book? There was a Victorian book called The Borrowers, Victorian child's book. So developers, they're now borrowers. So, you know, I'm sure there will be people, you know, looking out the borrowers have a look and see what was said about them. Now, can we ask you, Minister?
All very small.
Yes, I think the borrow. Yes, that's right. They were all very small. Can I just ask you here? The Taoiseach talked about crystallising losses, that the purpose of today's exercise was to crystallise the losses for the bankers and developers, and at the same time this process was our equivalent of a stimulus package. Now, who's the crystallising the losses for the bankers and the borrowers, the developers, is one thing. But where is the stimulus package in this? Because although you have a lot of references at the end of the speech to, as it were, worthy intentions, the evidence is, and we know that in relation to the 28 billion in Anglo-Irish Bank, that was nationalised, late nationalisation, the worst kind, forced on the edge of a precipice when there was nothing else that could be done. We know that in relation to that particular bank, its managing director or chairman came into the Dáil and acknowledged that basically it was a zombie bank. And I noticed that in your report today, you have nothing to say, and I presume you would, if the bank had been able to become, the undead, if we are in a kind of nightmare movie. You never suggested that it had become undead. Now, Anglo-Irish Bank and Irish Nationwide, as I say, they account for half of the 77 billion. Can you tell us, Minister, how much of the 54 billion they actually account for? Because I think that among all the parties in this House, there is a recognition that there are different kinds of banks. Bank of Ireland and Allied Irish banks are Main Street banks. People all over the country put their money in those banks, and people all over the country, businesses all over the country, expect to get credit and expect to get loans and so on from them. The folly of the Fianna Fáil approach to the guarantee, I think in this document is laid out absolutely for everybody to see. Because we basically went to the wall this time last year. In a way, you said at the time that we would be the first movers, and this would give us a tremendous advantage and sort out the liquidity problems. It never did. That's why you're back here today. And judging by the small print in your speech, that's why you may be back here again, if I read these figures correctly. And you're careful not to give us too much of a breakdown. Now, can you just explain so that ordinary business people can understand? And can you explain as well you said a 10 to 15% premium in relation to long-term economic value. Can I just put it to you? Somebody wrote to me the other day about, unfortunately, they're falling behind with their mortgage and so on, and they're facing their house being repossessed. Do you know, Minister, that when a bank repossesses somebody's house, and apparently after Christmas, when the NAMA legislation is through, an awful lot of people who work in the courts are really worried about the level of repossession cases that are building up. But do you know, Minister, that when a bank repossesses, either through the courts or by agreement, because a lot of repossessions don't reach the courts, people just give the keys back. Did you know that the bank is empowered to go out and sell the house for whatever the bank can get? The bank doesn't give the poor unfortunate who lost the job, they don't give them a 10 or a 15% premium for long-term economic value. So can you explain through us to the people of Ireland why, when an ordinary couple who have lost their house, maybe like a developer, they didn't manage their money affairs too well. We all understand developer might have been too optimistic and got a bit carried away.
Deputy, that's what you seem to be suggesting.
Sorry, but can you explain, you in your speech there are offering a premium for long-term economic value in the tables that you've laid out of between 10 and 15%. We don't know the breakdown between the 5 institutions, but in your speech and in the tables, that's the way I work it out. And you refer to it as well in your speech. Can you tell me why, for couples or businesses that are being repossessed by the banks at the moment, they get no 10 to 15% premium for economic value, when long-term economic value, when their house that has been repossessed is sold? But you are proposing that the developers...
Sorry, Deputy, you're wrong. Borrowers get no premium. Borrowers hold their money and NAMA pursues them. So don't try and misrepresent that issue.
Well then, in relation to the bill, can you then tell us why the bill contains no specific requirement to charge interest to the borrowers and the developers? There is a provision for the possibility of interest in various sections of the bill, but our legal advisors, who have read the bill very carefully, have pointed out to us that there is no requirement to charge interest. So you're giving there's no requirement to charge interest. It is not written into the bill. There is a capacity to do that, but it's not a requirement. So the developers have been walking around town, I know this, I'm sure you do too, knowing that they are expecting a holiday from interest from NAMA. Well, sorry, excuse me now. Just excuse me.
They're borrowers.
It's not the requirement to charge interest. The power to charge interest and the capacity to charge interest is in the bill, but not the necessity to do so.
Put the necessity in if you want.
Well, thank you, Minister. That's very... Thank you.
Listen to us more often.
Well, given the fact that in your 77 million, the rolled up interest, in your 77 million, Minister, the rolled up interest amounted to 9 billion. And that 9 billion of rolled up interest is generally, but again you haven't told us, is generally thought to have occurred in the last 2 or 3 years. So if our developers end up getting an interest holiday under NAMA for a couple of years, that alone could be worth another very substantial sum of billions to them. Not only that, but you will recall that when the judges were looking at
holiday planned, and this type of representation is what poisons this debate.
Well, sorry, we're reading the bill. We have senior counsel advising us on what is in it. And by the way,
there won't be any interest holidays.
And by the way, when Judge Clark last week was having a look at Zoe's, one of the things that he found totally fanciful, Minister, was the notion that KPMG did include an interest holiday in the Zoe presentation. Now, Minister, I just wonder, where on God's earth did KPMG, who are a reputable firm of accountants, get the idea? Did they pluck it out of the sky that there was going to be some happy interest holiday or its equivalent for Carol?
It's the story of the street.
We're getting to the bottom of it now.
Well, now, you see, this is where this toxic triangle of Fianna Fáil, the bankers and the developers, the borrowers, needs to be sorted. And I'll send you the relevant sections of the bill. And I want to, by the way, acknowledge, Minister, that you already wrote to me yesterday changing certain sections in the bill at the previous request of the Labour Party in relation to legal advice that we got about current crisis conditions. So I'll send you the further legal advice, and I accept that it would be good in the public interest if you were to amend the bill. Now, can I just say that, you know, like Alice in Wonderland, this particular presentation by you today, it requires us to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. But I think that the biggest thing that this comes down to is trust. And I think there are some questions for people in this country. Do we trust Fianna Fáil and you to head up the biggest property firm on the planet? Do we trust Fianna Fáil not to bail out the bankers and the borrowers? Do we trust the Minister, yourself, who said that the blanket bank guarantee would be the cheapest bank rescue in the world? Do we trust a Taoiseach who pleaded that Ireland's economic fundamentals were sound when it was plain to see that we were teetering on the brink of disaster? Do we trust a government that inflated a property bubble, ignored all advice to curtail property-based tax incentives, and then buried their heads in the sand when the House of Cards collapsed? Do we trust the Green Party to put the country first, or will they stay in office at all costs? The people are giving their verdict. We are getting mountains of emails and letters pleading with the government to change course because they know we're heading for disaster. Fianna Fáil is, at rock bottom, I think, in the polls, and that is an indication of where people feel that trust has been betrayed. The modest prosperity that so many people built up through hard work in this country over the last 15, 20 years, people see it slipping away and ebbing away from them. And it's so painful in so many ways.